How's it going, guys? Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Phil Talk Sports Podcast. Joining me today, the radio voice of the Stetson Hatters, Kenny Schierlinger. How's it going, man? Good to see you.
How you doing, Phil? It's always great to talk to you and talk it up about some sports.
Yeah, we've been wanting to do this for a while. I've had the pleasure of working with Kenny on many projects at both the Daytona Tortugas and more recently with the Stetson Hatters. But those have been my main, stopping points. I've also done stuff at Daytona State, but you have more of the Johnny Cash situation. You've been everywhere, man. So we got a lot of different things to get into. I guess the best place to start is I noticed you got your Michigan State polo on right now.
Yeah.
That's your like be all end all, right? That's your top team. Like if you had to list everything, is that the team you love the most?
Yeah, MSU's the childhood team. It's what I grew up watching, along with all the Detroit sports. So even though I didn't end up graduating from there, I always kind of bleed green and white, and it works out with Stetson as well. They're the same colors, same Nike gear and everything. So it always works.
You're a Florida native like I am. Do I have that
Yep.
correct? Okay, so where does the Michigan ties come from then? Is it just family or?
Yeah, family. Whole dad side of the family's Michigan, Detroit area. Born and raised there, and then my dad came down and for work and stuff, and ended up being raised in Florida, but always I like to say I was kind of brainwashed from a young age, which not complaining, but grandfather was a big Detroit everything. He was actually a Wolverines fan, but
Okay.
My dad went to Michigan State, and so it kind of latched on to that, and we bonded over that over the years, and that's kind of how everything kind of got going, and followed Michigan State ever since.
Nice. My whole family's from like the Long Island area, but luckily none of them follow sports all that much, which is a good thing because I might have ended up a Jets fan. I might have had been brainwashed like you, and you can ask Justin. That's no way to live. We don't.
No, yeah.
So I'm kind of lucky that didn't happen. So like you said, you kind of started your post high school career at Michigan State, but when you were in high school, before you got into like broadcasting and that side of stuff, you were on the court and on the field and stuff. So you played at what, Seabreeze, right, in high school?
Yeah, I actually started at Spruce Creek and played basketball there, just JV. I played a lot. Played a lot more travel basketball for the Ormond Beach Bruins and stuff. So I played with like basically all the area kids. So I was just kind of the shooter and kind of situational guy with a lot of the really good players in the area. A lot of them went on to play in the college level, Division I level, whether football, basketball. So that's kind of how I was in high school. And then when I transferred to Seabreeze, which was I went to Seabreeze my last 2 years, so junior and senior year, I always played golf. That was another thing that I was always into. That was kind of my grandfather that got me into that. So I played golf at Seabreeze my final 2 years. I wanted to play both at Spruce Creek, but Spruce Creek, they only let you play one sport. If you're playing golf, that's what you're doing, because it's a year-round thing. They have a great program there. So Seabreeze was very competitive as well, but it was a little bit more laid back that you could play other things. And
Gotcha.
I just stuck with golf. I kind of just kept on playing the travel ball and didn't want to play basketball later in my high school career. But the other thing I did at high school that kind of got me into maybe thinking about broadcasting is I emceed the pep rallies my senior year at Seabreeze. And that was a lot of fun and kind of got me in front of a whole bunch of people, got me out of my comfort zone, and didn't really, coming out of school, trying to transition to Michigan State. I didn't think I was going to get into broadcasting because I went there originally just to get a general business degree, and then had thoughts of working for one of either the football or basketball team. And I didn't in the fall because it was just hard to get into, which I'm glad to do, which I was happy to do, because it was just a great time. They had a really good team, went to the college football playoff and won the Big Ten that year. So I kind of enjoyed that as a fan. And then in the spring, I got into trying out as a student manager for the football team. And that was all during spring ball, and got offered that job. But I wanted to get into a sports management program at that point, and Michigan State didn't have they had a concentration in sports management. I wanted to get a full-blown one. So ended up going coming back down to Florida, and ended up at Florida State and Tallahassee Community College, dual enrolling in there, and talked to Florida State and became a student manager for their football team, because Michigan State offered me. So they kind of put me on the radar with that.
Sure,
And
yeah.
that was a great time too. It was 2016. And they were really rolling there, Florida State. It was the second to last year, I believe, of Jimbo Fisher's era there, and won the Orange Bowl there. They ended up beating Michigan, so that was a lot of great times. I still very connected with a lot of friends who were managers with me, and a lot of the guys who were a little bit older have kind of moved on to working for NFL teams or being NFL agents. You kind of name it. And the ones that like an NFL scout, kind of in the front office department for the Indianapolis Colts, and kind of take you a long way. So I really enjoyed that. And so when I was at Florida State, I kind of came to another crossroads that I realized I wanted to. I didn't like the behind the scenes football, kind of just being like just immersed in the game as much as I really wanted. I thought I would. I kind of like the experience of sports and college sports, and kind of just the way everything kind of transforms on a weekend on campus and everything. I really like the experience. So I wanted to get into something that you can experience that type of stuff in the same capacity while still working in sports, and broadcasting was kind of what came to mind. So I kind of started talking to people. I had this one conversation with a Wake Forest assistant coach when I was at Florida State, and he was a student assistant for the team. Or he was a student assistant up at Bowling Green State University, and he was working for Dave Clawson there, and then Dave Clawson went to Wake Forest, so he followed him down there, and then he became like a recruiting coordinator. I believe that's what his position was then. And we started talking about Bowling Green and other things like that, and different programs. And so that kind of sparked it. I started looking around different programs, and I started looking around the country for a program that could get both sports management and sports broadcasting at the same time. And looked into Bowling Green, visited there. I also looked into Miami University up in Ohio, and those were two of the really top programs that I was looking at that you could get both, and ended up liking Miami more, and transferred there my junior year, and ended up getting into I was still doing student assistant coaching for the football team at Miami. And then I realized I really wanted to just dive into broadcasting. So I started getting involved with the student radio there, and doing football, basketball, hockey, you name it, those last 2 years, and kind of cut my teeth doing play-by-play, and getting the background of video editing and news writing and all that stuff that you need to have as well. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. I loved all the stops I was at. Loved Michigan State. Florida State was awesome as well. And Miami was just kind of just a great place to be.
I mean, I could definitely see, like, brands like Michigan State or Florida State, like some people would think like, oh, that must be the better experience, but there's something to be said about a smaller program, and you were able to get more out of it, just, helping. I could see like the smaller program being the more rewarding experience sometimes too. So that doesn't surprise me, but I think it could surprise other people to hear that.
Yeah, Miami's kind of has the great tradition of the cradle of coaches. I mean, you go look back at all the great coaches who were at Miami at one time. It's kind of shocking with both Sham Beckler and Woody Hayes, and you have like Sid Gillum and all these guys who came through there. So going there, it's not as small as a program, and I think a lot of people would say. In the MAC, it's obviously a smaller Division I program, but they have lots of support, lots of history there, and facilities were as good, if not better, than the other places I was at, just because the tremendous support and boosters. John Harbaugh gives money all the time to Miami's football program because he's an alum and played there. So it's really deeply rooted in football, and so it was a great experience coaching there, being a student assistant for the defensive line. That was a great experience, but ended up getting into broadcasting and kind of cut my teeth with that, and kind of the rest was history, and enjoyed my time there, and got into coming back down here, which I never thought would have happened. So you kind of maybe preview that for me a little bit.
Right. Yeah. One question I did have too, like, so from Michigan State to Florida State, it was mostly for a job opening was the reason to make that move, right? Like you said, you were offered the job there, but Florida State also had like a slightly better offer at the time. Is that how that went down?
It was more, it was for the major. I transferred
Okay,
because
right.
of the major, because I wanted to get into sports management. Sports management was very big at Florida State, and they actually had a sports management program rather than a concentration. If I really realized at the time that I wanted to do broadcasting, which is kind of what I've leaned to do, obviously with
Right.
my background, I should have stayed at Michigan State because they have like one of the top programs for
Sure.
sports media. So,
Was
but
that a
at the time,
difficult decision just from the fan in you? Like, I'm at my dream school, the school I've loved and followed all my life. Like, at the time, it seemed like the right move, and it got you. You know, it was one of the steps in the journey that you already had. But like, just from a sheer like I went to UCF for a while, similar. Like, don't have my degree from there, but that I always consider that my school. And I went back to Daytona State because they had the live sports program, and it was a strictly like just being stubborn of like, do I really want to leave? This is the right move, but like leaving your dream school is like a difficult decision sometimes.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was very difficult. I had like the best time you possibly could have there. It was the first time living away from home, so you always going to be attached to that. You're on your own with all these different kids in your dorm and stuff, and I made like lifelong friends. I'm still very much in touch with a lot of friends at Michigan State or who are at Michigan State with me. Everybody's kind of gone now, obviously.
Sure,
but,
yeah, it's been a while.
I had family members. I had my really good second cousin who's a really good friend of mine, and kind of befriended a lot of his friends they were all a little bit older. They were seniors when I was a freshman. So I kind of had a lot of this different spread of friends and made a lot of good friends in my dorm and just kind of so on. And it was tough. I really did want to stay there, but it was just a combination of wanting to get into a program that was kind of be best for me, and then also a little bit cheaper with in-state tuition down in Miami or down in Tallahassee, and was fortunate enough to save some money as well going to Tallahassee Community College, and that kind of helped out with everything and kind of offset the out-of-state tuition at Michigan State and Miami as well once I went back up there.
Right.
But everything worked out. It was definitely unconventional way to go about my college career. I finished in 4 years somehow. I did a lot of summer classes and stuff and kind of worked my butt off with that. But it was a great, I think I got the most out of my college experience. And now I have just tons of people everywhere in Michigan, Ohio. I did an internship in St. Louis over in between my junior and senior year. So I have just a lot of people everywhere, and everybody kind of branches out once you graduate. So that's definitely been big for me, and just kind of socially and professionally to have those type of people, and wouldn't change a thing honestly about it. The fandom and not having the degree from Michigan State kind of stings just a little bit, but
I have to ask that because I like, that's a very unique situation that not many people are in. And like, we both share that, where it's like, I could have just trucked along and picked a major just to say that like, oh, my degree's from UCF, but it's like, no, this is probably the right move to go back to Daytona and everything. So it's a unique situation that not many people are faced with. So like, I get where you came from with that for sure.
Yeah, no, it definitely is something, and that doesn't discredit anybody's fandom or anything. There's plenty of people who are fans of schools that didn't go to school there or didn't get a degree from there. I mean, the college football and college sports wouldn't be what they are today if only the people that went to those schools were fans. So that's kind of,
it is a nice little jab you can give them. Like, you deal with Gator fans in the area and you're like, hey, at least I went to the school I cheer for. Yeah. Most of the time they did not. But you mentioned, Florida State, you were there. So what, 2016?
16, yeah.
So that was, in hindsight being 50-50 in the words of Cam Newton, that was really the last great year for Florida State. They, winning the Orange Bowl, beating Michigan, which had to have been extra sweet for you. Of all teams they could have beating Michigan. And not many people know somebody with an Orange Bowl championship ring, but I happen to, because Kenny happens to have one. How does that process work? How far down the line of a staff gets like rings? Does it depend on the school? Is it really just?
It really kind of, usually the school, you win a big bowl game like that. Usually just about anybody who has their hands in the program helping out, whether it's student trainers, athletic training staff, equipment managers like us, or even down to, I mean, you kind of just name it. Anybody who's really involved with the program, compliance people, anything like that, you get a ring, and everybody gets the ring at the same time. Really,
Nice.
you get your before you go on the bowl trip, which was down in Miami. It was a quick trip, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
You get your ring size, and they give you a bunch of rings, and you tell them what size you want, and a couple of weeks later, after I think we got it at the end of January or the beginning of February, which the game was at the end of in December. You get your bowl ring, and you get a nice little box with it, and
Nice.
It's definitely cool to have. I mean, they put your name on it and everything.
Yeah.
And
Is that your only one from your stops? Do you like from
yeah,
Michigan State time or
yeah,
anything? Yeah.
no, none at Michigan State. Or I mean, if I was working with the team in the fall, I would have.
Sure. Yeah.
They had a couple. They got a couple rings. I think one for the Big Ten championship, and then one for making the playoff. But yeah, that's the only one I have. Hopefully, get one eventually, whether it's at Stetson or somewhere else. But
Yeah.
it's definitely cool to have, and lots of good memories. We work really hard for the ring, man. And it was equipment managers always understand how much work you kind of put into it, and it's not always the flashiest thing to do, doing laundry late at night, or making sure that guys have their cleats and stuff like that, and all that type of stuff. But
it is nice to know that they at least like understand and appreciate the work that goes in behind the scenes like that. Like it could be a program thing, but I could see places that don't recognize those kind of people. So like to see that Florida State does among other places is reassuring. You mentioned it was one of the last couple of years of like Jimbo Fisher being there, and nowadays Florida State fans have like a love, it's a complicated relationship with Jimbo. Like one of my common guests on here is my friend Richard, who was on the Marching Chiefs for like his early stint, like his first year or so or whatever. And he's always kind of portrayed as like a hard ass and stuff. I'm sure you saw him in a light that the average person. How would you describe him as like a coach and just someone to be around? Because he's kind of an interesting personality from what we can see on the other side of the TV.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very fiery guy. Obviously, attention to detail is very important to him. Never really had too much interactions with him, maybe in the elevator with him or something like that, going down from the coach's office, and you just say, "Hey, how you doing?" or just kind of your common elevator talk or anything like that. But he's a good guy. I think everybody has their own opinions on college football coaches. Never. All the coaches that I've worked with, whether it was at Michigan State with D'Antonio or Jimbo Fisher, or Chuck Martin up at Miami, Roger Hughes at Stetson, they're all really good guys. They're really people don't understand. I don't think some people understand like how passionate they are to really building young men and working and being mentors towards them, because they're all like father figures to a lot of these guys, because they're not with their families. They're far away from home and things like that, and they really care about obviously they care about wins and losses, but they really care about developing and being a teacher for life for these guys. And I'm sure there's some coaches out there that maybe not as nice as the guys that I've worked with, but I have no complaints at all. I really like all the coaches that I was around, and really fortunate to kind of be around those type of individuals, because they're all very motivational, and you kind of can take away a lot of things from what they say and how they act and what they do.
When you removed from that place, that program for so many years, do you follow it the same way you do like Michigan State and like Miami being your true alma mater, quote unquote? Like, is Florida State right up there, or is it like a 1B? Like, do you consider it the same level for your fandom, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, I always follow Michigan State and Miami. I guess like a little bit more. I think Florida State, if being honest, is more of a kind of like a old like kind of place of work, and I follow them and I want to see them exceed a lot. But
right,
I kind of see it more as like of a professional connection rather than like a fandom connection. So, and then also with being a sports broadcaster, you naturally have to be unbiased about certain things. So, um, definitely you and me talking kind of on here or face to face. I mean, it's kind of always going to be a little bit different than I'm on camera or
Sure. Yeah.
talking to somebody more in a
That being
professional
said,
setting or something like that.
do you think it's easier to like let's say you had stayed at Michigan State and did the program there, and do you see now as working at Stetson, for example, another program that it's a business relationship. You want to see them do well, obviously. You want to get another ring to go with that other one at some point in some sport. Do you think it's easier as an announcer to work for somewhere that is that professional relationship and you could still put passion into it, but like, is it almost easier to do it that way as opposed to working for, Michigan State, for example, for you?
Yeah, I think being say the voice of Michigan State would be awesome. And there's a lot of guys that have become that.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with Steve Jones at Penn State, and he's the voice of football and basketball, and basically got into that right out of school. He went to Penn State, spinning any line through and through, and you can tell that that's what he wanted to do, and has never left. And he's been there for I don't know 40 plus years. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that I wouldn't say it would be easier, but I think it's just kind of different dynamic. I mean, when you're working for a school and like the voice of whatever team you're working for, um, you can be a little bit more biased rather than being on a national network or something like that, which is what I want to get to eventually, being uh, working for a national network like CBS, NBC, ESPN, or something like that. So that's definitely a different dynamic. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've seen there's instances. I mean, Jim Nantz was calling the Final Four with Houston in it, and he went to Houston, and you kind of see. I mean, there's plenty of guys. Everybody's got an alma mater, and he, Mike Tirico went to Syracuse. So I'm sure he's done plenty of Syracuse games. I
Right.
mean, you kind of name it. But
I did love earlier. I think it was this year or last. It was Joe Tessitore. It was a whole nother level because he was calling a game that his son
yeah,
happened to be in, and that's got to be a whole unique level too. So yeah, I mean, I can see it being not less or easier, but just coming from a different direction, which maybe some people could find easier. That's easier to be unbiased, I'm sure. But I think once
yeah,
you do it for a while, you kind of get used to it, like you said. Um,
exactly. Yep.
During your time at any of these programs, have you developed any relationships with like players? Like, does any one or two kind of stand out to you of guys that you've like maybe kept up with over the years?
Um, Nobody. I wouldn't say anybody who's a superstar or anything like
Yeah.
that. I'm trying to think who would be. Nobody I would like say would be like best friends. I mean, some guys that like would run into and say hi to. I mean, I guess it's kind of, I haven't really thought about that, but I mean, there's guys that I can kind of think right off the get go with Donald Payne at Stetson, with him being in the NFL and stuff, and having been able to interview him, and then Donald Parham, who's with the Chargers
Mm-hmm.
as well. Those guys kind of more recency bias, but those are kind of the bigger names that I can think of that I've been able to interview them and kind of have mutual friends and um, stuff like that. But yeah, there's one guy named Ashton Henderson who he was a Michigan State player. Actually, he grew up in Tallahassee, went to Michigan State, and grew up watching him. And he had at the time, Michigan State had the largest comeback in college football history against Northwestern. I think it was 34 points in the second half.
Oh wow.
And he would kind of spark that by returning a punt for a touchdown. It always kind of resonated. I always knew him and stuff, but he actually was at Florida State when I was there. So we always kind of bonded over that. He was an academic advisor. I don't know exactly his title, what he was there, but
Right.
he was a great guy, and we used to talk Michigan State and just up in his office all the time. And he actually just left Florida State for a position with the Detroit Pistons, and I believe again, I don't know his exact position, but he's
Sure. Yeah.
working kind of. I think he's the lack of better terms, like the director of cultural diversity and everything. So a lot of public work and kind of being in the community. And that's a great opportunity for him. And I keep in touch with him a lot. And he's been everywhere. And anytime I ever mention or meet anybody who's like an academic advising or compliance, I mention his name. Everybody knows him because he's very involved with many different types of committees and things like that. And just a great guy. So yeah, he's big, and I kind of lived through him vicariously, talking to him about different things when I was a kid. And yeah, it's weird. You meet people that that you kind of grew up watching. Obviously, that's more of a personal thing for me. But like when I was up at Penn State, like working with Jay Paterno and Steve Jones and those guys, and a couple of the guys that we had on the show. All of them were virtually, unfortunately, but I grew up. My mom went to Penn State, so I always kind of grew up with that rivalry in my family, and always kind of pulled for Penn State when they're playing Michigan State as a kid. Yeah. And Jay Paterno was offensive coordinator for a long time, and it's just always kind of fun to think about that. When I was a little kid, I was watching him and hoping that his team wouldn't score against my team, and then you kind of get on set and you're working and doing TV shows with those type of guys, and it's kind of funny. Even Donnie Jones at Stetson, he was on the staff for Florida when Michigan State beat him in the 2000 national championship with Billy Donovan, and those type of kind of weird things. I was 4 years old when that was going on, and now I'm sitting there interviewing, working with Coach Jones, and he's a great guy as well. But haven't brought that up to him because I'm sure that would make him feel a little bit old. But
sure,
it's a cool thing to think about. Sometimes you got to sit back and kind of look at that, and so yeah.
Donnie Jones for me too. Like we'll get to that more when we get to the Stetson part, which we're coming up to. But like when I really got into because I was someone who didn't have like a college team, quote unquote, growing up. It was when I got closer to college age that I would. And my first college football game ever was Penn State and LSU Capital One Bowl, which ended up being Joe Paterno's last bowl win. So I would always casually follow Penn State too. And then like once I got into college, it was UCF. But when I really started going to everything, Donnie Jones was the coach of UCF. So like to see him at Stetson now, it's like this weird, like, not that he's, I've run into him a couple times, but like to know him from a different place and see him here and doing the great things that he's doing, both like for the, players on the court and then, just, helping the program win in their first postseason game, in program history this year and everything. It's definitely someone that even when things weren't going great at UCF, I think he stayed around a few more years because he was just that likable. Like everyone knew that this is a guy you want working for your program, no matter what capacity. So I think in the timeline that brings us up to right around the time you joined the Daytona Tortugas, which is where you and I met originally. Yeah. You were working with Justin, who's been a guest on the show, fan of the show. At least I think he's a fan of the show, but he was on the show definitely. And you were helping him and everything, and that's when we met. So working for like Florida State and Miami, that was more football centric. I know you might have done a couple other things, but now moving to baseball and now at Stetson, where you do a little bit of everything. What would you say sport do you enjoy calling the most? Like if you could get it, if you like could pick the sport and you're there for life, which one would it be?
Yeah. And I think I even forgot to mention, I did a lot of baseball at Miami too, and cut my teeth with that. College baseball games are usually pretty long. So you get a lot of time, and that's always was very challenging, especially as a young broadcaster. So I did a lot of baseball, but I think my wheelhouse would be football, basketball, and baseball. That's kind of like the three sports that I really enjoy doing the most. It kind of football and basketball. If I had to kind of maybe pick a favorite, it's kind of just depending what season it is. I mean, basketball is just so much fun because the runs happen so quick, and it's a lot more high paced of the game. But football also is just a lot of fun because big plays can happen at any moment. And then baseball is something that you can have a lot of creativity. Doing radio for baseball is a lot of fun because you can kind of tell stories and stuff in between, and there's lots of downtime. And then baseball is just the ultimate game of strategy. So there's always a game going on within the game. And I wish I played a little bit more baseball when I was a kid because I kind of wish I had a little bit more of a background of being like a pitcher and that type of strategy and kind of more of the fundamentals. But I love baseball. Love watching all those sports as fans as well. But those are the big ones. I love hockey too. Hockey is like one of my favorite sports to watch, but I'm not the most technical with hockey, so I've always I've never really had too much experience with. I was at Miami. It was a very big hockey program, and there was another couple other kids who were really wanting to get into hockey, and a lot of guys who do hockey, it's kind of what they do. It's kind of like
Yeah.
a really niche sport.
I had a
So
guest, Nick Gimbel, who does Emery Riddle hockey, and he also has done starting to cut his teeth into soccer a little bit. And like, it's a similar enough game that you could see why it would transfer over. But he told the story of one of the first big soccer games he did. He, said like, oh, the guy's running up the left side of the ice, like it just slipped out because he's so used to doing hockey when he was doing soccer. So at least doing the other big three, they're so different
yeah,
that there's not as much carryover. So you got to learn all three, but like, for example, for me ever trying to get into it, and we will get into, I had the opportunity to call a game with Kenny this year during the spring football season. And we mentioned that there might've been an opportunity to do baseball, and that intimidated the hell out of me because like you said, that's the one that takes the most downtime. You need to know the most stuff. And like, you think, baseball until you sit down and try and do something like that. Like I know football, but it was still a challenge to call a game, of course. So I definitely could see all three of those being different. But to tell that story quickly of the game we got to call together, that was remotely during the, and that was the first time I got to call any sort of game. So it was going to be out of my element anyway. But for you, I know that you had to call a game remotely before this year. What kind of challenges does that pose to someone who's used to, staring right at the field or field of play for any game you've called probably prior to that?
I mean, the biggest challenge is you're kind of just at the mercy of what the camera's showing. I would say, and you're not in that atmosphere. You could the sounds, and especially doing radio. That's one of the things you need: the sights, sounds, smells, anything that's going on, what's going on outside the stadium, or whatever that may be. Kind of getting into that atmosphere definitely sets the tone of a broadcast. So that was definitely tough, and then you just kind of have like the technical things that sometimes don't happen. I know when we were calling the game that they were having trouble with the down and distance markers and stats. So that's something that you could run into. And I think they came out of a commercial break too late and missed a touchdown. So that was definitely something that was tough to kind of endure, but got to do a couple. Did one was against San Diego, and that ultimately became the last game. But was going to do the Davidson game remotely, and then that ultimately got canceled last weekend. So it was definitely a difficult learning curve, but everybody has had to deal with it. And it's something that was completely different this year. I mean, a lot of people call them Remy's, the remote broadcasts. They do a lot of they do a lot of those at the ESPN Worldwide Sports complex.
Yeah.
But basically every game for a long stretch was remote. So
even at Daytona State, like they have the facilities, but when we have the TV games, every sport gets a TV game on like local TV, and they've done them remotely just because we have the studio and then we have the the fields are so far apart that's kind of the default setting there anyway. But in most places that wouldn't be the case. But if we ever get a chance to call another game, I think it's safe to say the stats will be better and we'll know what down and distance it is. So it's immediately going to be an easier game to call, whether it's remote or not.
Yeah, no, exactly. And those other big broadcasts, when they're set up to do the remote broadcast, they have every screen and they have the crowd noise pumped in, or like kind of the natural sound going on in the game, and you see every camera angle so you can see what you want to see. So that makes it a little bit easier, but when you're kind of throwing it together and only have you and me doing it, it's definitely kind of tough. And hopefully and I think everything will be a lot more normal this coming year with the way everything's going. So excited to hopefully get on the road with Stetson, with football and basketball, and you name it, any other sport. So that's definitely something I look forward to doing again.
In between the stints at Stetson, you had some time in Pennsylvania. You hit on it earlier, covering, I'd say predominantly Penn State, but just Pennsylvania, things in the area of WHVL TV up there. And Pennsylvania. What was that like, kind of doing it not from like not being the voice of a program or a team, and from a more like third party, being a covering it from a network? Like, what's the differences that go into not being associated with the one place and kind of doing it from a bird's eye view?
Yeah, it was different. It was being a sports reporter was something that I always wanted to do, and getting onto TV. It was like my first real TV experience. So um, it was a great experience. I got to do sideline for the high school game of the week that we did, and can't remember how many we did, but it was close to double digits, and
Mm-hmm.
um, got to do that and got to produce and be on shows, primarily Penn State football shows. And we did a blue white tailgate is what it was called, and it was a weekly show kind of recapping the last week and then previewing the week coming up. And did one in the off season during the summer as well that kind of covered everything, kind of previewing position groups and things like that, and got to work with some really kind of seasoned people with Steve Jones, who's the voice of Penn State, and Jay Paterno, who's kind of got the insider on everything, and Todd, I'm blanking on his last name, Todd Sadowski, who worked at Fox 43 in Harrisburg. He was really a seasoned pro and got to learn a lot from him in the TV world. So that was great. And my editing skills, because I edited all the shows, were boosted from that. And I really took a lot from that, and kind of time management. And
which really paid off coming back to
yeah.
Stetson and some of the pieces you got to put together this year. So I'm sure some of that transferred over to like this basketball season, those, kind of sizzle reel videos you got to put together. I remember you covering, at least early on, covering a little bit of the Union and their run. And that was probably, they won the Supporter Shield. So that's like the most successful year in club history, really. So I'm sure that was, I know soccer isn't like your wheelhouse necessarily, but if you're going to cover a team, at least it was one that was playing well at the time.
Yeah, and we kind of had plans of doing more things with them, but ultimately kind of COVID decided that. But when we first started, we kind of jumped on it and reached out to them to try to get an inside look at like the MLS bubble, because that was the same time it was that in Orlando where the NBA was in their bubble. So had a couple interviews with some of their guys, and inside look of what everything was going on, and kind of day to day what they were going through. And it was definitely really cool. And soccer is something that I really appreciate. I never really got into as a kid. Kind of football, basketball, hockey, golf were like the big things for me growing up. But I always appreciated soccer, and not the most. I'm not the most brushed up on soccer, but I always trying to learn new sports and stuff. And interviewing people is the same. I mean, it doesn't matter what they play or what they do. So it was definitely cool to get an inside look into that. And it was a good time, and it's a great franchise they have up there.
Does any one interview stand out, or piece that you produced or something stand out from your time up there?
Doing the interviewing Trace McSorley was really cool.
Oh, nice. I don't know if I saw that one. I might have to try and dig that up.
Yeah, Trace McSorley was a really good guy, and really opened up about his time at Penn State. We interviewed him right after he got a lot of action. I believe he made his first start of his career in Pittsburgh. So that was kind of it was, I think, a couple days after that. So that was really fresh. And we kind of hit on that, and that was pretty special for him because he played his whole college career at Penn State, and just on the other side of the state got to play against the Steelers, which was probably a lot of mixed emotions for a lot of Penn State fans who are Steeler fans as well.
Yeah, of course.
But we had a partnership with the Ravens, because Penn State College is kind of in the middle of the state. So you have the Eagles, you have the Steelers, then also to the south, Baltimore is only 3 hours away as well. So we had a partnership with them, and played a lot of their content and had their preseason games. Or we were supposed to have preseason games, but we ended up ultimately showing they showed like classic games that they gave us the rights to. So we did a lot of things with them, and interviewing with some of their front office. And Trace McSorley was kind of the one that stood out to me. But we had a lot of different guests. on the show, and Matt Millen and Todd Blackledge and who else we have?
Because he works within he works with just like ESPN, right? Blackledge, doesn't he do like?
Blackledge is, yeah, he's ESPN. Yeah. He's matched up. We had him, and we also had Greg McElroy, who was a really good guest as well, and Bruce Feldman was good, and yeah, so those guys were definitely good to talk to. But I was fortunate to be a lot more involved with the Trace McSorley interview and kind of hit on what it meant to him doing having really a big impact for the Ravens in Pittsburgh and his time at Penn State. And because if you remember that 2016 team that they had, they won the Big Ten and beat Ohio State that year. And I think they really should have been in the playoff that year.
Should have won the Rose Bowl too, if nothing else. Yeah. That game still gets to me. Not even it being my number one team. That was, but at least gotten to win the Cotton Bowl the next year. At least he got to leave with some sort of bowl win,
Yeah, that was a stacked team. I really think that they kind of should have been the playoff that year. They had Trace McSorley, they had Saquon, they had all the wide receivers they had with I mean, you kind of name it with all those dudes, and they had a really good defense and everything. So it was that was a special team that they had with James Franklin, and it was their first Big Ten championship in a long time. So he's definitely a big name up there and really down to earth guy. So yeah, that one's the one that sticks out the most to me, I would say.
Yeah, he's definitely, as far as like college players go, someone that I've been as someone outside of UCF that I've been a big fan of. I remember his senior year, they played the Citrus Bowl against Kentucky. And I don't know if I planned on going to that. And then I think UCF's game ended up being the same day, but
I went to that. Yeah.
That was a shockingly good Kentucky team that they had to run into that, but it would have been nice to send him on that way. But whether he sticks with the Ravens or not, he's definitely somebody that I like to follow throughout his career and stuff. So that kind of brings us up to, nowadays where we mentioned Colin, some of the spring football, as short and odd of a season as that is. And now it's really all systems go on the baseball season. Like you said, you've been calling a lot of games, and Stetson's got the big one coming up against Florida here pretty soon. And so they're starting to bring fans back, right? It's not like they're not selling tickets, but there's people, or are they selling tickets now?
No, they're selling tickets. It's limited. I don't know what the exact number is. For a while, it was like 400. I don't know if it's increased or, but there's definitely
fans for that game. If nothing else, they'll try and poke out a few more.
Yeah, and they're doing a really good job, say for Stetson, with everything and getting fans into the stands. And obviously, you have the parents that can go, and then there's tickets available through the ticket office. And Dan, who's a really good friend of mine, who's the head of tickets at Stetson, he's
shout out to Dan.
Done a very good job with everything and taking tons of calls and making sure that anybody who wants to be at the game, they can get into the game. And people have been very good with masking up and being respectful of social distancing. And everybody's been very good with that up there. And it's been exciting. And Stetson baseball is really, they got a really good team this year. They had a tough series this past weekend against UNF, but they had the 10 days off because they had some COVID issues. So I think they're kind of shaking off the rust. But yeah, they're coming kind of down the last stretch of the season here. Only one more homestand, and then they have that lone return game with Florida coming up in the beginning of May. So that should be exciting. And I've been fortunate enough to get on some of the ESPN calls there, the ESPN Plus calls, and that's a great time to do that. And it's exciting, and hopefully they can get that automatic bid through the ASUN. But if not, I think they have a pretty decent shot of possibly getting an at-large bid. So that would be cool. And they probably most likely be playing in Florida as well, whether it's in Tallahassee or Gainesville or down in Miami, because I think they're going to try to keep it very regional this year with NCAA tournament, which usually isn't even the case
for baseball years too. They try to regionalize as much, and it went on a pretty good run a couple of years ago that really opened the eyes of people that aren't in this area. So now if they get back to that stage, like, it's not going to be as surprising to people. While we're doing the shout outs though, we'd be remiss to not mention Zach too, the great job that he does for the people that can be there and making it as entertaining as possible. So Zach, if you do hear this, I finally got Kenny on here, and you are next, because I was hoping to get both of you guys at one point or another. While we're mentioning baseball too, the MLB season's kind of young. this is like the Civil War for baseball fans. The OT baseball rule, the man on second. We've actually seen it for almost an entire year. Well, yeah, I think Hurricane cut off like the tail, but about 80% of a season, 90% of a season, the man on second to start, I think in the 10th inning or whatever it might be. I seeing it in action for 60 games or whatever we saw, I've become a fan of it. I don't think it hurts, doesn't benefit either team. It just gives you the opportunity to possibly end it a little bit sooner. Like a lot of baseball purists think it's the sacrilege or whatever. Like you've been in the game long enough. How do you feel about it?
I think it should maybe be pushed back, maybe a couple innings. Maybe
So
you started in the 11th or
does it start
the 10th.
on the 10th now, or where does it starts
right? It starts on the 10th, I believe.
Okay, so maybe
I've been right from the get-go. So yeah, moving it back to from the 10th, maybe the 11th or 12th inning, kind of, because at that point, once you start getting into the super extra innings there, it kind of can have a lasting effect on your bullpen and things like that. But it definitely makes it interesting, and it's fair because both teams do get their man on second. So, but it's too good. Like these players in the MLB are too good. In minor league baseball, it wasn't. I mean, a lot of times it would drag on
it almost didn't
you're gonna drop them in.
Factor. It almost didn't factor on the minors. Like you either could bring in your runners or you couldn't. But like it is like the baseball purists that seem to not like it, but they should be the ones that understand more than anybody how it works your bullpen more and everything. And like you mentioned, not being like as versed in soccer, that's how I feel about baseball. So I always like to ask other people, but you would think the people that argue about it would see the benefit of it more than like someone like me. But I'm as far as I know, I'm like on an island of myself about liking it. Who knows if it'll stay or whatever, but I mean, it definitely works for this year, I think.
Yeah, and I think the rule, like having the 7 inning doubleheaders have definitely helped a little bit.
Too. Yeah.
I think that 9 inning doubleheaders, and we've seen a couple of those with Stetson as well in college baseball. I believe the ASUN does not let them do it in conference play, so we haven't seen that recently. But I think that's a good job that Major League Baseball, and then I believe that we're right around the corner with having the universal DH, which makes the game a little bit more exciting. I grew up a Detroit Tiger fan, so I've always watched AL baseball a lot more than NL baseball, so I've always been used to that. You definitely have to appreciate kind of the small ball and the strategy that has to do with the NL and having your pitcher hitting and pinch hitting at opportune times and things like that. But I think baseball is kind of, it's unique with having the two leagues and having the different rules. But I think it's probably time to go to the universal DH, protecting pitchers and make it a little bit more exciting, having another big bat in there.
Because like you said, it's unique in the sense that like the AFC and the NFC don't have different rules. The East and the West in the NBA, the 3-point line is in the same spot, so it is unique in the sense that it probably is about time to pick one or the other. I agree with that definitely too.
Yeah, and there's so many interleague games now.
They used to be such a big deal, and now it's like, oh, it's Wednesday, so here you go.
Yeah. So it's kind of makes it a little bit more difficult for the different teams, rather than when you only had that 1 or 2 week stretch of interleague games, or even in the past when you had no interleague games in the World Series was literally the only time you're ever seeing those teams. So that's definitely I think it's something that is just kind of aged out, and I think needs to change. And the other thing would be, I think that 162 games might be a little bit too much. I think you cut it down. I'm a big proponent of making everything more meaningful. I mean, even in the NBA, I think they play maybe a little bit too much games, because you have a lot of teams that sit out their big stars on different nights, depending on what's going on. And you can really kind of afford that the way everything's going. And I just don't think it's the best for the game. I think if you cut it down, it makes every game a little bit more meaningful. I mean, say there's a big LeBron fan in Orlando, and he only gets to see LeBron one time a year maybe, and he's sitting out on a Wednesday night against Orlando because they're playing Brooklyn on Saturday and they want LeBron to be completely rested up for that. I think if you cut it down and that game means a little bit more than LeBron's playing, I think it's better for the league. I think it's better for everything. But that's something that is a totally different story. I mean, the league.
It was even mentioned in The Last Dance. Jordan kind of had that mentality of like some kid is only going to get to see Michael Jordan maybe once in his life, and if I'm not playing, that chance might be gone. And while that might be a little bit of an extreme, I prefer guys that have that mindset over, oh, I'll just take this game off. Like if you're like there's hurt and there's injured. Obviously, you can play hurt, you can't play injured. So like I see the difference in that. But yeah, I mean, this year it's a little different because there's only so many people going. So maybe this is the year to take advantage of it. But yeah, in the future, I do think it's a little too many games, and with the NBA even and baseball, same thing with purists. They don't want to get rid of any games. But I mean, me, where I sit as a very casual baseball fan, like the closest you can get to like an even 100 games, I think would be awesome. Like, I think that's too low. I don't think that'll ever happen. But in a perfect world, I think 100-game season would actually make every game as important as ever.
Yeah. And I think, I think it would just be, and I kind of even lean toward being a purist. Like, I'm not a huge fan of they talk about having the automated and like automatic strike zones and things like that. Like, I really like the human element in that. And
are you a bat flip guy or no bat flip?
No, it's the Bush League stuff is, I think that's kind of special in baseball, but if you're going to bat flip, and you're just going to have to kind of roll with it. If you might get thrown at. I mean, it's definitely a completely different sport, because I mean, throwing a baseball at somebody at 100 miles an hour is something that's definitely dangerous, but
people are okay with for whatever reason, because it's been part of the game for so long.
Yeah, I mean,
the funny thing is, if people didn't lose their shit over bat flips, guys wouldn't do it. I think they do it to get a rise out of people at the end of the day too,
Yeah. I think if you want to have some words with the guy and tell him you disagree, I think that's kind of the way to go, rather than throwing an object at somebody's head. I think that's a little bit too much. Mm-hmm. And so I think having those type of unwritten rules is kind of what makes baseball special, and hockey especially. Hockey is like one of those sports as well that, and I think hockey's always stayed true to really what it really started as. You let the players settle everything themselves, and the injury reports are almost non-existent. And it's always great when you're at the end of the playoffs and a team gets knocked out, and you learn that so-and-so was playing with a broken rib, or so-and-so was playing with a broken thumb. Like that's just not I mean, you injury reports in the NFL and
I have the weirdest relationship too with hockey. Like, is every year it starts, I'm like, no, this is going to be the year that I get really into hockey. And like, I'll always watch a couple, and then you watch the playoffs. But like, I always compare it to, I always say to me, hockey's like the cool coworker that you want to hang out with outside of work, and you just never get around to it. That's me with hockey. Like the playoffs, like there's no other playoff like it. I think hockey is the best playoff system there is. And I'll watch the Flyers, and I'll watch the Islanders a little bit because family's from Long Island and everything. But I every year I try to get, and I do get more and more into it, but it's going to be a while till I'm like, very hard rooted into it, I think.
Yeah. And I was kind of brought up into it with my grandfather and my dad. We grew up big Red Wings fans, and that was the team. I mean, the Red Wings are the most successful team I've ever followed. And when I was little, they're winning Stanley Cups left and right. And so I've always been a big hockey guy. I like college hockey a lot too. Those are really special to go to. And watch. And I don't know if you watched any of the Frozen Four this past year, but the first set, the national championship was a little bit of blowout. It was 5-0, but UMass winning it for the first time is really cool. But those two semifinal games they're great. I mean, the second one went till like 12:30. It was went to overtime, and the first one before that was great as well. And hockey's is special. I think it's the best sport to watch live. If you get to go to one,
which we still need to do one day too. I've still been meaning to go to the Solar Bears at some point.
Yeah, Solar Bears, Lightning game. I mean, any level of hockey is really exciting to go to.
We were filling out at work. We were filling out the brackets for March Madness, and I just said out loud to the guys I work with, like, they have basically the same tournament for hockey. Why is the bracket for hockey not a big deal? And two of my coworkers didn't even know that like the Frozen Four existed. So it's like I don't know why maybe they need to market it a little more, but like I would fill out a bracket for college hockey even if I knew nothing about it, because most of the time people don't know anything about their basketball brackets either. So I think they should do a bracket for hockey as well. I think that would be cool.
Yeah. This March Madness and NCAA tournament just kind of has its own aura. I mean, it's just a week-long thing. It's during the work week. People are skipping out at work or watching it
at work. I know I did
watching it. Their kids are watching it. I mean, I was always that kid who'd figure out how to watch it sometime. Maybe even skip school one day or go home early to make sure you're catching all the games. But yeah, it's just totally different, I think. But yeah, I think the Frozen Four, an NCAA tournament is something that I think if a lot of people sat down and watched it, they would get a lot more into it.
Definitely.
And but I mean, you've seen it. Like hockey gets that, I can't remember the year, but that gold cup game or gold medal game with Canada and the US. I don't know, it was probably 10 years ago at this point. It was with Crosby and all those guys and all the NHL stars, the American guys, like that was a huge deal. And a lot of people got into that.
Dream team on ice, people were calling it,
Yeah, and that was it went to overtime and it was just a big deal. And TJ Oshie, when he scored, that was a couple years after that, he kind of became like a household name when he scored that goal. And I actually watched Miracle last night.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So like that's just, I mean, this is a great thing. And not having the NHL players in the Olympics previously kind of hurt, I think, without the big names. So I think that needs to kind of, and I'm not sure what the status of that is, but
we watched Fever Pitch last night, so that's where some of the baseball questions were coming from. Having that fresh.
Yeah, that's a great movie too. Yeah.
So I got 3 kind of rapid fire questions as we start to roll out here. If the sports gods came to you and said one of your teams gets a championship in the next year, which team is it? We only get one. Doesn't mean they can't happen down the line, but for this year, who gets
this year?
Yeah,
I think the most elusive one I think is winning a college football championship. Okay, I think that's the toughest one to get. But I mean, being a Lions fan, I think that's always just been the epitome of getting there. Because I mean, I know like Michigan State has won a national championship in football. They've won multiple. So like that, I mean, it's a totally different thing now, but I think if you had to pick one, it has to be a Lions Super Bowl win.
That makes sense.
That's kind of what it's always been.
Yeah, if you're getting a guarantee, then that's probably a good one to spend it on. That's
yeah, exactly.
If someone says, who's your favorite athlete, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Favorite athlete ever. That's really tough. I'd have to say probably Calvin Johnson.
Okay.
Or Chauncey Billups. I'm not sure.
That's good. I mean, it's you get your top 3 even if you want to throw like one more in there. But yeah, it's definitely a more tough of a question. Third one, and actually ended my interview with Justin the same way. So I'm interested what your your answer to this would be. If someone came to you as like a freshman in high school and said, "I want to do what you do," what advice would you give them?
I'd say talk to as many people as possible. That's say if you want to get into broadcasting or getting into anything, talk to anybody who is in that and kind of pick their brain. That's kind of what I did, talking to many as just calling up people, and usually people are going to be receptive to that and help you out. And there's lots of knowledge because everybody makes mistakes and learns from mistakes. That's kind of just the biggest learning experience that you really go through, not in the classroom, not through your successes. It's really kind of making those mistakes that's what you learn the most through. So if you can avoid making those mistakes and learn from it from other people, then you're just ahead of the game. So I think just talking to anybody, picking people's brains, doesn't matter how big or small they are. It might be tougher to get through somebody like Joe Buck. I've tried with some different connections or something, but you definitely could talk to guys like Justin Rock, who's the voice of the Tortugas, or somebody who's like Evan Weston, the voice of Orlando City. Those type of guys who you can shoot. And social media has been so easy to make it, excuse me, social media has made it so easy to reach out to people. I reached out to Adam Amin when he was with ESPN to try to get what he does to prepare for games. And he sent me his like spotting boards and his game notes and everything. And sent me all that on his Google Drive. And I still use a lot of those documents that he sent to me to this day. I kind of tweaked it myself, but those type of guys are awesome to talk to. So I think if you're in high school and you want to learn about something or get into something, or kind of tell them what your goal and where you want to go and what you're willing to do it. And that's kind of the best advice that I could have. And reading.
That's great. And I've even noticed too with my like journey of it, like some guys are a little more receptive, but it tends to be the people that are comfortable in their spot are more willing to help people out. So if like you talk to someone that's not too receptive, it's probably not you. It's that they're not fully confident in the spot they have. So like it just comes down to who you talk to. But I think everyone's got at least some piece of information too to give to anybody. But no, man, this has been a lot of fun. I've heard, I've known you for a couple of years. I've heard a lot of these stories, never in like one spring like this. So it's cool to like hear everything that you've gone and all the different states and programs that you've worked for. And it's cool to hear this story, and I hope to have you on again. But before we get out of here, I do want to here on camera and everything, I want to thank you for all the opportunities that you've given me at Stetson, and calling that game for with you was, even though it was remotely and all the things wrong, it was like a bucket list thing, and I hope to do it again one day. And I appreciate all the help you've given me as I work on my own journey here. So that won't be forgotten, and I really appreciate it.
No, man, absolutely. You're the best, man. You're one of the guys, the sports elite in the Daytona Beach area. So
okay, I'm gonna use that quote, I think. All right.
So I always love helping out people who know are passionate and know what they're doing and have different sets of skills. And thanks I gotta thank you for always being there to talk about things and get your opinion on certain things. And thanks for having me on. It was great talking to you, and
no problem.
Talk again sometime soon.
Now that I think everyone's got your story, I can have you on for other things. Where do people in the meantime find you on social media to see the various things that you got going?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter or Instagram, even if Facebook or anything like that. It's K Schierlinger. K, my first initial and my last name, which is SCHIERLANGER. It's long, but if you type in the first couple of letters, it usually kind of pops up. So all right, that's kind of how you could find me. Mm-hmm. little plug there with the social medias.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
That's the way you end it. No problem, man. All right, guys. Well, thank you all for listening. Thanks, Kenny, again for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.